Most people retire on this much, and it's probably not what you think. Let me tell you something that may surprise you. After spending more than 2 decades helping people navigate their finances, planning retirements, and answering some of the most emotional money questions imaginable, I discovered something that almost nobody talks about openly. Most people are not completely honest about their money. Now, I don't mean they're bad people. I don't mean they're intentionally trying to deceive anyone. But when it comes to retirement savings, people have a tendency to exaggerate, round up, leave things out, or present a version of reality that sounds a whole lot better than what's actually sitting in their bank accounts. Maybe you've experienced it yourself. A neighbor casually mentions they retired with well over $1 million. A former coworker claims they have more money than they'll ever need. An old friend talks about retirement as if they won the financial lottery. And suddenly you start looking at your own savings account and wondering if you've somehow fallen behind. You start asking yourself difficult questions. Am I saving enough? Will I ever be able to retire? Do I need another few years of work? Should I delay retirement because everyone else seems to have more money than I do? These thoughts can be overwhelming, and unfortunately, fear has a way of convincing us that we're never quite ready. In fact, one of the biggest tragedies I witnessed throughout my career was watching people postpone the life they wanted because they were chasing a retirement number that they didn't actually need. They traded time for money. They traded experiences for account balances. They traded memories for additional years in the office. And sometimes those years never came back. That's why today I want to share something incredibly important with you. We're going to look at what retirees actually have, not what people claim to have. Not what financial marketing tells you that you need, not what social media influencers brag about. We're going to look at real numbers from real studies and see what retirement truly looks like for most Americans. Because once you understand the facts, something remarkable happens. Fear starts to lose its grip and confidence starts to grow. Let's begin with one of the biggest fears retirees face: running out of money. If you're worried about this, you're certainly not alone. According to research conducted by Goldman Sachs, roughly 6 out of every 10 retirees fear they could outlive their savings. Think about that for a moment. More than half of retirees wake up wondering whether the money they've worked decades to accumulate will actually last. That's a heavy burden to carry. And when fear becomes the driving force behind financial decisions, it often causes people to behave in ways that may not serve them well. They save more than they need to. They spend less than they can afford. They delay retirement longer than necessary. They deny themselves experiences they've spent decades working toward. I've met retirees who were financially secure on paper, but emotionally trapped by fear. They wouldn't take vacations. They wouldn't visit family. They wouldn't spend money on hobbies they loved. They wouldn't replace old appliances or fix things around the house. Why? Because they were terrified of spending money. Meanwhile, their retirement accounts continued growing year after year. The irony was heartbreaking. They had enough money. What they lacked was confidence. And confidence doesn't come from guessing. Confidence comes from understanding the numbers. So let's talk about those numbers. What do people actually have saved for retirement? The answer may surprise you. According to data collected through the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances and estimates from retirement research organizations, nearly 8 out of 10 Americans have less than $100,000 in dedicated retirement accounts. Let that sink in. 8 out of 10. Now, that doesn't mean they're all destitute. It doesn't mean they have nothing else. Those numbers specifically focus on retirement accounts such as 401ks, IRAs, and similar plans. Many people also have home equity, savings accounts, investment accounts, pensions, or other assets. But still, the data paints a picture that's very different from what many people imagine. When you hear financial experts constantly discussing million-dollar retirement portfolios, it's easy to assume that's normal. It isn't. In fact, it's relatively rare. And that's why it's so important to understand another measurement: Net worth. Net worth is simply everything you own minus everything you owe. It's one of the best ways to measure overall financial health because it includes much more than just retirement accounts. For most families, net worth includes their home, savings, investments, vehicles, and other assets after subtracting debts. When researchers looked at Americans approaching retirement age, they found something interesting. For households between ages 55 and 64, median net worth was roughly $365,000. For households between ages 65 and 74, it increased to approximately $410,000. And for those over age 75, it settled around the mid-$300,000 range. Notice something important. These aren't million-dollar households. These aren't financial celebrities. These are ordinary Americans, and yet many of them are retired. Many of them report being satisfied. Many of them are living lives they enjoy. That's an important reminder that retirement is not solely determined by the size of your account balance. Retirement is about the relationship between what you have and what you need. Now let's talk about the upper end of the spectrum because I know some of you are curious. What about the wealthiest retirees? What about those top savers? To reach the top 25% of households approaching retirement, net worth is generally around $1.2 million. That's impressive. To enter the top 10%, net worth often reaches approximately $3 million. Again, impressive. But here's the key point. Those numbers represent the exception, not the rule. Sometimes we compare ourselves to the most successful examples we can find and assume that's the standard. It isn't. That's like looking at professional athletes and deciding everyone should perform at that level. The reality is far different. Most retirees are operating with substantially less, and yet many are doing just fine. Now, there's another factor that dramatically influences retirement outcomes, and honestly, it doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Relationships. One of the most fascinating long-term studies ever conducted followed individuals over several decades and examined how marital status affected wealth accumulation. The results were striking. Married couples who stayed married accumulated substantially more wealth than almost every other group. People who remarried accumulated less. People who divorced and remained divorced accumulated significantly less, and individuals who never married generally accumulated the least. Why does this happen? The answer isn't complicated. Partnership creates efficiency, two incomes, shared expenses, shared responsibilities, shared goals. When two people work together financially for decades, wealth tends to grow more easily. Of course, life isn't always that simple. People divorce, people lose spouses, life happens. But the lesson here isn't about judging anyone's choices. The lesson is understanding that financial outcomes are often influenced by factors beyond investment returns and savings rates. Money is connected to life, and life is complicated. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming everyone starts from the same place. They don't. Different circumstances create different outcomes. That's why comparing yourself to others is usually a losing game. The only comparison that matters is whether you're making progress relative to your own goals. Now, there is another discovery that completely changed the way I think about retirement planning. And if you take nothing else away from today's conversation, I hope you'll remember this. People who have a written financial plan tend to accumulate significantly more wealth than people who don't. Not because they're smarter, not because they earn more, not because they have access to secret investments. They simply have direction. Think about it. If you were getting in your car and driving across the country, would you just start driving randomly and hope you eventually arrive at your destination? Of course not. You would have a map, you would have a route, you would know where you're going. Yet when it comes to retirement, millions of people do exactly that. They save whatever is left over at the end of the month. They invest without a strategy. They guess how much they'll need, and then they hope everything works out. Hope is wonderful in many areas of life, but hope is not a retirement plan. Research has consistently shown that people with a financial plan tend to have substantially more assets than people without one. Part of that is because planning creates awareness. When you know where your money is going, you make better decisions. When you know how much you need, you stop chasing unrealistic targets. When you know you're on track, you stop worrying unnecessarily. And let me tell you something. Peace of mind may be one of the most valuable assets you can possess in retirement. I have worked with retirees who had millions of dollars and couldn't sleep at night. I've also worked with retirees who had far less money but enjoyed every day because they understood their situation and trusted their plan. Money alone does not create security. Confidence creates security. Knowledge creates security. Clarity creates security. That's why creating a retirement plan isn't just about numbers. It's about freedom. It's about waking up in the morning without that knot in your stomach. It's about knowing where you stand. Now let's talk about something that is often overlooked when discussing retirement wealth: Social Security. For many Americans, Social Security is not just a supplement, it's the foundation, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Some people hear the words Social Security and immediately dismiss it. They act as though relying on Social Security somehow means you failed financially. That couldn't be further from the truth. You paid into the system throughout your working life. Those benefits are part of your retirement income. You've earned them. The average Social Security benefit today is roughly $2,000 per month. For a married couple, that can become a meaningful source of income. And while nobody would describe Social Security as luxurious, it provides a financial foundation that many retirees build upon successfully. This is one of the reasons why retirement often looks different than people imagine. Many pre-retirees focus entirely on how much money they've saved. But retirement income comes from multiple sources: savings, investments, pensions for some people, Social Security, home equity, part-time work if desired. The question isn't simply, how much money do I have? The better question is, how much income can I generate? Those are two very different conversations. And here's where I want to challenge one of the biggest retirement myths in America: the myth that everyone needs $1 million to retire. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that number. $1 million. For years, it has been treated almost like a magic number. Reach 1 million and you're safe. Fail to reach 1 million and you're doomed. But real life isn't that simple. In fact, only a small percentage of Americans ever accumulate $1 million retirement portfolio. Think about that. The retirement target that everyone seems obsessed with is actually achieved by relatively few people. So let's ask an important question. If most retirees don't have $1 million, how are they surviving? The answer is surprisingly simple. Many retirees don't need $1 million. That statement may shock some people. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, having $1 million is wonderful. If you can save it, fantastic. If you can accumulate more than that, even better. But the problem occurs when people assume $1 million is required, because once that belief takes hold, fear often follows. People delay retirement. People continue working jobs they dislike. People sacrifice experiences. People postpone dreams, all because they're chasing a number someone else told them they needed. The truth is that retirement needs are highly personal. Someone spending $40,000 per year will have different needs than someone spending $120,000 per year. Someone living in a low-cost area will have different needs than someone living in a major city. Someone with no mortgage will have different needs than someone carrying significant debt. There is no universal retirement number. There is only your retirement number. And that's why comparisons can be so dangerous. The goal isn't to retire with someone else's money. The goal is to retire with enough money for your life. Now let's talk about one of the most important lessons I've learned after decades of helping people build wealth. It comes down to 3 simple principles, and the first one is absolutely essential: Spend less than you earn. I know that doesn't sound exciting. It's not flashy. Nobody is going to write a best-selling book called The Thrilling Power of Spending Less Than You Earn, but it works. And it works every single time. What's fascinating is that financial stress doesn't disappear automatically when income rises. Many people believe that once they reach a certain salary, money worries will vanish. Yet research shows something very different. There are individuals earning modest incomes who manage their money beautifully, and there are individuals earning hundreds of thousands of dollars who live paycheck to paycheck. How is that possible? Lifestyle inflation. Every raise becomes a bigger house, a nicer car, more subscriptions, more spending, more obligations. Instead of creating wealth, higher income creates higher expenses. I've seen people earning $500,000 annually who felt financially trapped, not because they didn't earn enough, because they spent too much. And I've seen families earning a fraction of that amount who built meaningful wealth because they lived intentionally. Money management isn't about how much you make. It's about what you do with what you make. Every dollar has a job. The more intentional you become with those dollars, the more powerful they become. The second lesson is connected to housing. For most Americans, their home is their largest asset. A house can be a wonderful tool for building long-term wealth, but it can also become a financial burden if it stretches the budget too far. The goal isn't to own the biggest house. The goal is to own a house that supports your life rather than controls it. And then there's the third principle. Relationships matter, not just emotionally, financially. A healthy partnership often creates financial stability because people are working together rather than pulling in opposite directions. Again, life isn't perfect. Not every relationship works. But when two people share financial goals and communicate openly, the results can be incredibly powerful. Now let's shift our attention to another retirement misconception. Many people believe they need to replace 80% of their working income after retirement. You've probably heard that rule before. Save enough so that retirement income equals roughly 80% of your salary. Sounds reasonable, except reality often tells a different story. Research consistently shows that many retirees are perfectly satisfied spending far less than they earned during their working years. Why? Because retirement changes expenses. The daily commute disappears. Payroll taxes disappear. Retirement contributions disappear. Work clothes disappear. Many work-related expenses disappear. At the same time, retirees often discover something surprising. The things that bring the greatest happiness aren't always expensive. Time with family, morning walks, coffee with friends, volunteering, traveling selectively, pursuing hobbies, reading, gardening, freedom. The most meaningful parts of retirement frequently cost less than people expect. And that's an incredibly important realization, because if your spending naturally decreases in retirement, your savings may go further than you think. I remember speaking with retirees who were terrified before leaving work. They worried constantly about whether they had enough. Then 6 months later, they'd come back and tell me something remarkable. We're spending less than we thought. We're happier than we expected. We should have retired sooner. Not everyone says that, of course, but I heard it often enough to recognize a pattern. Fear was exaggerating the problem. Reality turned out to be much more manageable. And that brings me to what I believe is one of the most important truths about retirement. Retirement is not a math problem. It's a life decision. Yes, numbers matter. Absolutely. But retirement is ultimately about how you want to spend the years ahead. Money is simply a tool. The purpose of money isn't to accumulate the largest account balance possible. The purpose of money is to support a meaningful life. Sometimes I think we forget that. We become so focused on growing wealth that we lose sight of why we wanted wealth in the first place. What good is an extra $1 million if you never have time to enjoy your life? What good is another decade of work if your health declines during that decade? What good is financial security if fear prevents you from using it? These are deeply personal questions. Only you can answer them, but they deserve serious consideration. As we bring this conversation to a close, I want you to take a deep breath and hear this clearly. You do not need to retire with what someone else has. You do not need to retire according to someone else's timeline. And you certainly do not need to spend your remaining healthy years chasing a financial target that may not even be necessary for the life you want to live. One of the greatest gifts retirement offers is time. Time to wake up without an alarm clock, time to have breakfast without rushing out the door, time to visit your children and grandchildren, time to travel, time to volunteer, time to finally explore the interests and passions that were pushed aside during decades of working and raising a family. And here's the uncomfortable truth: time is the one asset you can never earn back. You can always make more money. You can take on another project. You can earn another paycheck. But once a year passes, it's gone forever. That's why retirement planning isn't simply about maximizing wealth. It's about balancing wealth with life. I've met people who retired with modest savings and lived extraordinarily fulfilling lives. I've also met people with several $1 million who remained trapped in anxiety, constantly worried that one bad market year would somehow ruin everything. The difference wasn't always their bank account. The difference was their mindset. The happiest retirees I encountered shared several things in common. They understood their spending. They had realistic expectations. They appreciated what they had, and they stopped comparing themselves to everyone else. Comparison is one of the fastest ways to destroy financial confidence. There will always be someone with a larger house, a bigger investment account, a newer car, a more impressive retirement portfolio. If your goal is to keep up with everybody else, you'll spend your entire life feeling behind. Instead, ask a different question. Do I have enough for the life I want? That's the question that matters. Not what your neighbor has, not what your former coworker claims to have, not what some stranger on the internet says they accumulated. Your life, your goals, your retirement. Because here's something I've learned after years of working with retirees. Many people who appear wealthy aren't nearly as wealthy as you think. And many people who quietly enjoy retirement without bragging are doing much better than anyone realizes. The loudest voices are not always the most successful voices. People love talking about financial victories. Very few people openly discuss financial struggles. That's one reason retirement statistics can feel so surprising. The reality is often far different than the stories we hear at backyard barbecues, family gatherings, and neighborhood conversations. The numbers tell a much more balanced story, a story where many retirees have far less saved than you might expect. A story where Social Security plays a major role, a story where spending habits matter just as much as investment balances, a story where planning often matters more than perfection, and perhaps most importantly, a story where happiness and wealth are not always perfectly connected. Now, does that mean you should stop saving? Absolutely not. Please continue saving, continue investing, continue making wise financial decisions. Future, you will be grateful. But don't allow fear to become the driving force behind every decision. Fear can convince you that you'll never have enough. Fear can convince you to postpone joy indefinitely. Fear can convince you that you're behind when you're actually doing just fine. One exercise I often recommend is this. Imagine yourself at age 85. You're sitting quietly, reflecting on your life. What would that future version of you want to say? Would they thank you for saving responsibly? Probably. Would they thank you for avoiding unnecessary debt? Absolutely. But would they also want you to enjoy your healthy years, to travel while you can, to spend time with loved ones, to create memories? Without question, retirement planning should help you live, not merely exist. That's why I encourage people to focus on financial confidence rather than financial perfection. Perfection is impossible. Markets fluctuate, life happens, unexpected expenses arise. No retirement plan unfolds exactly as expected, but confidence allows you to adapt. Confidence allows you to make decisions. Confidence allows you to enjoy the journey. And speaking of confidence, let's return to Social Security for a moment because I think this point is incredibly important. Far too many people underestimate the value of guaranteed income. When Social Security arrives every month, regardless of what the stock market is doing, it provides stability. For many retirees, that stability is worth more than they realize. Combined with savings, investments, and thoughtful spending, Social Security becomes one of the pillars supporting retirement security. This is precisely why so many retirees report being satisfied despite having account balances that financial media often labels as too small. They're not relying solely on savings. They're using multiple sources of income. They're living within their means, and they're adapting as circumstances change. That's real retirement, not perfection, adaptation. Let's also talk about another issue that doesn't get enough attention: health. When people discuss retirement, the conversation usually revolves around money, but health may be just as important. I've seen individuals work several extra years trying to build a larger nest egg. Unfortunately, during those years, their health declined. The trips they wanted to take became harder. The adventures they imagined became less realistic. The energy they expected to have wasn't there anymore. That's not meant to scare you. It's meant to remind you that retirement timing is about more than finances. Your health matters. Your relationships matter. Your quality of life matters. Sometimes the ideal retirement date isn't the one that maximizes wealth. Sometimes it's the one that maximizes life. Only you can determine where that balance exists, but it's worth thinking about because no financial statement can measure the value of watching a grandchild grow up. No brokerage account can replace years spent with people you love. No investment return can recreate time that has already passed. Money is important, very important, but money is a tool. Life is the goal. So where does all of this leave us? It leaves us with a surprisingly encouraging message. Most people retire on less than you think. Many retirees are doing better than the headlines suggest. $1 million is not the universal requirement people often claim it is. Social Security remains an important foundation. Planning matters, spending matters, mindset matters. And perhaps most importantly, your retirement journey does not have to look like anyone else's. If you're behind on savings, don't give up. Start where you are. If you're doing well, keep going. If you're approaching retirement and feeling nervous, that's normal. Almost everyone feels nervous. But don't let that nervousness prevent you from looking at the facts objectively. The facts are often far less frightening than the stories fear tells us. And finally, I want you to remember this. Retirement is not about reaching a specific number. Retirement is about reaching a point where your resources support the life you want to live. For some people, that's $200,000. For others, it's $2 million. Neither number determines your worth. Neither number guarantees happiness. The goal is not to win a retirement competition. The goal is to create a retirement that feels meaningful, secure, and fulfilling for you. So stop measuring your progress against everyone around you. Stop worrying about the exaggerated stories people tell. Focus on your plan. Focus on your goals. Focus on creating a life that reflects your values. Because at the end of the day, retirement isn't about how much money you have. It's about how much freedom your money gives you. And sometimes that freedom arrives a lot sooner than you think. If you've enjoyed today's discussion, make sure you subscribe to the channel and join me for the next video. Because one of the biggest retirement mistakes people make has nothing to do with savings accounts, investment returns, or Social Security. It has to do with the age they choose to retire. And in our next conversation, I'm going to show you why waiting until 65 may not always be the smartest decision. You might be surprised by what the research reveals. I'll see you there.